treat me wrong. Come and love you, daddy, all night long.
And you? What do you do?
It's a bit complicated to explain.
Hey, hey.
You know, I still didn't get exactly what your job is.
That is what I do.
New Renault Arcana E-Tech Hybrid from €299 per month on the road. Winner, Irish Medium Crossover SUV in the 2022 Car of the Year Awards.
A grain of rice, a grain of rice is going to tip the scale. Just remember that, lad.
There's a small bit of a needle there.
Now, come on, Mayo, you've got to get Andy Moran into the game.
Liston victories and now they're really roaring. And I can tell you that there won't be a cow milk from County Clare for at least a week.
Hello everyone, you're very welcome to the Irish Examiner Gaelic Football Show. My name is Paul Rouse and I'm joined by the former Armagh footballer Oisín McConville and by the former Clare footballer Gary Brennan. 3 provincial semi-finals at the weekend, 3 fairly lopsided results in the end, even if the matches were closer in certain instances than the scores suggest. But if we leave aside the results for a minute, Oisín, what was the best coach team you saw this weekend?
I don't think there's any debate about that, and you know what? This is a recurring theme as far as Mickey Graham's concerned. I thought Cavan were coached to within an inch of their lives, and almost pulled off another huge upset. And I think for me, one of the reasons why it makes it so significant is that 2 reasons. First of all, 2020, when Donegal felt they were ambushed by Cavan, and a few things fell away towards the end of the game, and they ended up winning it. And then last week, you know, going into that game, surely Donegal looked at Tyrone and went, "Listen, lads, we can't be in any way. You know, we can't take this for granted. We can't be any way undercooked. We have to bring everything we have." And so they had 2 real shots across the bow, you know, as far as warnings were concerned. And they turned up yesterday, and it turned out it had nothing really to do with the psychology of the thing. It had more to do with the fact that what Mickey Graham was selling, there was a huge amount of substance about it. And if you're the general, you have to have foot soldiers in order to carry out what your plan is. And in those Cavan lads, he has that. Now, the reason why I've always said McGuinness's the coaching job Jim McGuinness did to win the All-Ireland with Donegal was probably one of the greatest exploits I've ever seen, probably in any sport. And the reason for that was that I had a fairly in-depth knowledge of a lot of those guys who he was coaching. So he had a change of mindset first and foremost, and then he had to coach them. They had to be coachable, and they had to deliver on a plan that, let's face it, what didn't exactly have the backing of the nation at the time. So you're up against it in a huge amount of ways. But a couple of different things yesterday from Cavan. How they rotated the +1, how they rotated their full forward line, how they were able to retain the majority of their own kickouts, and a lot of those under a huge amount of pressure. And I think put all those things together. And one more thing, and it might be a lesson to teams. There was no major obsession with who was doing the man marking jobs on the significant Donegal players. And I can't tell you, as a coach, how difficult that is to watch, how trusting you have to be in the people that you have out there. For example, like Murphy, you would expect somebody just to stay with Murphy, but no. Clark put Murphy on the back foot on numerous occasions in the first half. Murphy still had his imprint and still had his stamp on the game by the time the game was over, but stuff like that. And they rotated a couple of times on McBrearty and just made things difficult for them.
They lost by 6 points, Oisín.
They did. But this is the thing. I think that we lose on. I think we have a notion in our head. The team that wins are really well coached, and the team that loses have got something wrong. I don't think Cavan got anything wrong yesterday. And I think that's the gulf that's between those teams. And do you know what, Paul? We're going to go on, obviously, and talk about Cork and Kerry later. And when we talk about Cork and Kerry, we're going to talk about, 12 points between the two teams?
Yeah.
Like, it could have easily ended up at least 9, if not 10-point difference yesterday with Cavan. But I still would sit here and I'd still back up everything that I'm saying. And I would still maintain that was as good and as much as Mickey Graham could have got out of that team yesterday. And when you're a coach, that's all you can do. Throw Mickey Graham into the Donegal setup, and Donegal potentially would win an All-Ireland.
Oh, really? Do you really believe that?
Yeah, that's how good I think he is. That's how well set up his teams are, and he, as I say, he has good players in Cavan. But just towards the end, when like Donegal got 1-1 off the bench, Cavan got nothing. I know 1-1, it's not huge. One of the goals was pretty fortuitous, all that sort of stuff, but it's still 1-1. Like when McConville come on, like look at what he added, driving forward and all that. So they just have a deeper.
Can I ask you a question? Can I ask you a question about this?
Deeper bench, yeah.
I just want to ask you a question about this. You are giving Mickey Graham a lot of credit there for getting close to Donegal yesterday. And you obviously 2020 they were brilliantly set up in 2020. Do you also credit him with getting Cavan demoted to Division 4?
That's a good spin on it, Paul. That's a good spin on it, but I just think
it's a fact. It's not
I know. Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. Relax. Like a dog with a bone this morning. But anyhow, yeah. No, I think he has to. Yeah, he has to. Yeah, he's culpable for that. Yeah, but I do think that there's excuses for that. I think that when Cavan went to the heights that they went to, they were finding it very difficult to reach those heights again. I think they were finding it very difficult for motivation to play in divisions that they were playing in. And they went to the bottom. They went to an all-time low. I said at the start of the league, Paul, I couldn't see them losing any points. And to be honest, they could have been in a scrap for relegation good in the last couple of games, but they just had enough quality. But I do think that when it comes to championship, they are a different animal, and he's a different animal in the way that he sets his teams up. So. I think a lot of the stuff that we seen yesterday, he'd been keeping in his pocket for this game, and trying to even you look at the Antrim game. So many things that were different yesterday in comparison to the Antrim game. So if you look at those two games, you think he was keeping a lot of stuff up his sleeve in order to do that. So I do completely accept that point, and he has to be held responsible for that, but. I just think when it comes to championship football, the way he sets his teams up, and just for us to maybe get away from this thing where, if you lose, that in some way you've got it wrong. You have to look at the quality of both teams. You have to look at where both teams are operating as far as league positions and all that. So that's the big thing for me, and that's something that sort of irks me now and again whenever teams talk about, like certain teams winning All-Irelands or certain teams, winning Ulster titles or Munster titles or that. Like, I mean, that doesn't mean they're any better coach. It just means a lot of times that the quality isn't the same in both camps.
Gary, down in Clare, the huge step forward that Clare football made in the last 7 or 8 years is hugely attributed to Colm Collins often. Do you think that that's right?
I do, yeah. In fairness, if you look at what we had, or standing before Colm came in versus since Colm came in, you can't argue that Colm has been one of the main drivers in that impact. Now, in fairness, to be fair, in the previous couple of years, Micheál McDermott, we'd won 6 out of 6 in Division 4. to start with, which in any other year I think would have got you promoted. And then we ended up losing the last two to Limerick by point and Waterford, and the two of them got up ahead of us. That was when there was 9 teams in it. Kilkenny played, but then the following year, Mick O'Dwyer was with us, and we were beaten by Limerick again, or we drew with Limerick, I think maybe on the last day, where a win would have put us up. So it's not like we were miles off it. In some years we had been, but I always felt that once we'd get out of Division 4, we actually could make strides pretty quickly. It was just that fact that we were in the bottom division. Not everyone was buying in, and I felt if we could get that leap, we'd start to build quickly, I suppose. And when Cullum came in, I think the big thing that Cullum did was he removed excuses. So a lot of the time there had been guys were saying the hurlers get this and we don't get that, or we're not supported in this way, or the hurlers are supported. And Cullum just removed that. Whether to some degree we got better resources, but I still would say we probably weren't on par with the hurlers, but that just became a non-issue, and the focus was on ourselves and what we needed to do. And I think it's that mindset and that kind of culture that he started to create that was the real kickstart for us starting to develop and improve and move up the divisions and become more competitive. So I would say he was the man who really instilled that mindset, and that's why I think it's more than fair to say that he should get most of the credit for what has happened. Now, he's also been very intelligent in the coaching choices he's made and the coaches he's brought in. Early on in those times, I know Cullum had watched us in the Munster final in 12, where Cork ran through us for 3 goals, and that used to drive him cracked. So his first coach was Paddy Kazan, who straight away set us up defensively. We had a good, we weren't a defensive team, but we had a good defensive structure. And when Paddy moved on, then he looked to develop that in another angle. We kind of took what Paddy had brought with us. Efi Fitzgerald came in for a year. We had Mick Bohan then as well, who looked to develop and I suppose really looking to up the skill levels and trying to look at our attack a bit more. So he kind of brought the learnings from each coach with him as he went along and used the people around him very, very well. So it takes a whole team, obviously, and Cullum would be the first to say that. It takes having the players, and it takes having the coaching team. It takes having, I suppose, all the support network around you from the county board and supporters clubs or whatever it may be. But someone has to be the figurehead, and people have to believe in that figurehead and have to believe in that leader. And I think that's what Cullum brought to us anyway.
In that respect, I've really enjoyed the columns that you've written for the Examiner and learned from them in the last few weeks. And you were very generous in what you wrote about Limerick and Clare and Limerick and the job that Billy Lee is doing there. But you had a really interesting line in the middle of the last column where you wrote, "Far too often in my time we played not to lose." What did you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I would say that was more a criticism of ourselves as a group of players, maybe. There was probably a certain amount of fear of, like, when we were playing Limerick, we had started to climb the divisions. They were not climbing them in the same way. We had started to get the upper hand. And when we were playing Limerick in the first round of the championship, everything hung on that, because our shot against Kerry could only happen if we got over Limerick. And I think we used to play a little bit tentatively, a little bit afraid of losing to Limerick, rather than actually going at them and attacking them and using our strengths. So that was kind of what I was referencing there. I was hoping that Clare would really go at Limerick and try to trouble them, rather than becoming completely focused on what Limerick could threaten with and trying to shut that down. And they actually did, but the results, I suppose, didn't go their way. But much like Oisín said, because Clare lost that game, it didn't mean that Clare didn't play poorly. In a lot of aspects, Clare improved their play hugely from the league. It was a much better display than a lot of their league games, but Limerick just played better. And sometimes you have to take that. The one thing I was listening to you, Oisín, talking about the Cavan performance, and it strikes me that a lot of people throw out the words moral victory
when a team maxes out but comes up short. How do you respond to those words, moral victory?
Yeah, I don't think there's much in that, much in a moral victory. I don't really think there's like it's moral victory sounds like somebody getting something out of it, but I don't really feel as if anybody got anything out of it yesterday. You know, I don't think Cavan got anything huge out of that yesterday. Walking away. I mean, I think in time to maybe have a look at it and say we got a lot of things right. But you know what GA is like. You know what sport is like. The real focus will be on the things that went wrong. The few chances they had, you know, when probably from 56 or 7 minutes to about the 63rd or 4th, where you know, Jason McLaughlin had one chance in particular where, you know, you probably need to recycle that ball, especially if you've got number 2 on your back, and get it back out and try and get McKernan or somebody on it who's starting to have a massive influence on it. Like I do know, Paul, and I do appreciate that when we went through the game yesterday, we spent a lot of time talking about Cavan in particular at half time when it was 9 each. But I think that's just where both teams were coming from, and the expectation that you have on Donegal coming into the game. I mean, you know, they're a Division 1 team that, like, they've been now in 10 Ulster finals in 12 years, which is a truly amazing stat. They've done a lot of that from the preliminary round as well, which was before Donegal started to progress through the preliminary rounds, was completely unheard of. So, like, Donegal are doing a lot of things right. I just always feel as if there's more there. I always feel as if you look at their squad, that you know, a lot of teams would be very envious of it. I look at Cavan yesterday. I look at their under-20s. I look at Monaghan. I look at, there's a couple of other teams, but they're the ones just spring to mind off the top of my head, who are getting the absolute maximum out of the players that they have. I don't think Donegal are getting the maximum out of the players that they have. And they looked a bit better, actually, in the second half. And maybe that's the half of football that we should focus on and say, like, that's more like Donegal. But really and truly, 2 shots for points, breaking ball, stick them in the net, and that's essentially why they won the game. So I just think for me, again, go back to what we were talking about at half time yesterday, is I just don't feel as if they mix it up enough. I think at times, like in the first half, like I don't think they put enough ball into the full forward. And I know sometimes I can over-egg that about, you know, being direct and that, but sometimes you just got to make the other team think, even if it comes back out. You know, just make the other team think that they can't set up in a way that, you know, they're continuously, you know, making that wall going to break down. I mean, Donegal, what had they at half? Was it 9 each at half time, and 5 of those were free kicks? Like, you know, 2 of them probably debatable enough. So, like, we could have been in a much different position at half time, but just felt as if they didn't mix it up. But I think they deserve credit for the fact that not playing that well, they stuck in the game. And it just felt as if you're watching a game, like if you're just watching a game, you weren't close to the scoreboard. I mean, if you weren't passing any remarks to the scoreboard, you would think Cavan were winning by 7 or 8 points. That's how dominant the performance felt. And yet Donegal stuck in there and then played much better football, mixed it up a little bit.
Are they contenders? Are they contenders for the All-Ireland?
I think the contenders via the fact that I don't think there's any outstanding candidate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You
don't think Kerry are the outstanding candidate?
They're a candidate. They're one of the top candidates, but there's still stuff I don't like. There's still stuff that.
What don't you like?
Oh, like a couple of years ago, Paul, right? In the last couple of years, when Dublin were dominant, okay, one of the things I used to hear from certain people and people in the same game as ourselves was that I don't know who's going to beat Dublin, but somebody's going to beat Dublin, and that used to grind my gears in a huge way. And now I find myself thinking, Kerry are the top ranking team, and yet I always get the feeling somebody's going to pip them on a certain day because certain things are going to malfunction, and I think there's problems in all of the they're not perfect.
You don't know who's going to beat Kerry, but somebody's going to beat them. Is that? Have you become what you've hated?
Yeah, I sort of have. I sort of have, but I'd like to see more of them. I don't we don't get any sense of where Kerry are at, do we really? Like in the Munster Championship. No disrespect, but we don't get any sense of that at all.
Gary.
Hold on, let me finish.
Let him finish.
Go on, Gary. Stick the boot in.
Gary, you can't let that pass.
No, I let him finish. I'm just priming myself here.
So I just think that yesterday they looked like a lot of players looked like they needed the game. That was the first thing. Some guys who had missed out on maybe some of the league action, they looked as if they needed a game. They'll not get a test now until the quarterfinal. Are they going to be ready for it? The qualifiers are loaded, so it's impossible to think that they won't get a very, very stiff challenge, and they're the two challenges that they have to pass even to get to an All-Ireland final. So underprepared. I don't think Munster Championship was any preparation for going into an All-Ireland quarterfinal.
Kerry, you're going to reach a quarterfinal, Gary, unprepared.
Yeah, I suppose we've listened to that now for a long time down here. And there's a couple of sides to it. Like on the one hand, right, if Dublin, Tyrone, any of the top teams were going up playing Kerry in the morning, it'd be a bit like, will they have enough to beat them? Bar that Dublin team who dominated for 5-6 years, there'd be no guarantee that any of them would beat Kerry on a given day. And then there's kind of this thing thrown at us or other teams that we're not giving Kerry enough of a test. Like, it's kind of, I suppose we're doing all we can, or we're doing all we can. And I do remember there was one year in particular where we had Kerry in the park at home, and I felt we had them really rattled. I'm not sure, was it 15 or maybe 16 maybe. And we should have beaten them. It definitely was the best chance I'd say we had to beat them. And Fitzmaurice came out afterwards, and whether he was kind of protecting, I suppose, the mindset of his own, or talking to supporters or what, I think he described it as they got the dirty diesel out, and if you'd looked at Kerry that day, me coming off the field, I wouldn't have said they were All-Ireland contenders or that they were going to win the All-Ireland, but they did win it. It must have been, was it 14 that went on and beat Donegal?
Yeah. 14, yeah.
Yeah. So oftentimes I found, I suppose, that Kerry, when they'd absolutely eat us, and it happened a couple of times early in the championship, they were probably ticking along too well early in the year at that stage, where on years where we'd really put it up to them more, and maybe that contributes to what Oisín's saying there, that maybe we gave them more of a test, that they tended to improve a bit more as the year goes on. But, that argument, I suppose, that Kerry are unprepared, like how prepared were Dublin coming out of Leinster there for a number of years? How prepared were Mayo? Probably a little bit better. So there's ways of managing that if that's the major concern for Kerry, like that they're not getting enough of a test. There's ways of preparing for that in training or whatever. But
were you impressed by Kerry on Saturday night?
I felt it was a little bit of a coming into it as a bit of a no-win for them, because if they hammered Cork, everyone would say, well, they should have hammered them anyway. And then when they didn't hammer them, it's a bit like, oh, well, there's still questions about Kerry. But I suppose I'd be wondering if what would have answered those questions about Kerry on Saturday evening. What could they have done that people would have said, oh, the questions about them are answered now? I'm not sure they could have answered them, and they'll only be answered when it comes to an Ireland semi-final or a final. That's the only time Kerry can answer those questions that are there about them at the moment. So it was a little bit of a no-win. I'd be looking at kind of patterns in the play, or what might stand to them later in the year. And what was particularly impressive, I suppose, was what I'd call their double teaming or triple teaming at times. So when Cork looked to bring it into contact, first man held up, second man was in within a second, maybe even a third man stripping the ball. Particularly in the second half, they increased that intensity around the middle. I didn't think their forward play was as fluid as they might like it to be. They probably didn't get David Clifford involved as much as they'd like. And around the middle, I think they let Cork win more of the kick out than they would have liked until such time as David Moran came on. They seemed to set a wall across the middle, force Cork to go long, and then whether win it clean or win breaks. And that was a big source of possession for Cork right through the league. And what I had seen them, they were happy enough to go along and flood the breaks and take the risk of losing it. And when Cork lost that energy around the middle, that's when Kerry started to take over, I suppose, a little bit more and stream through and tag on the few scores at the end. So I think they'd be a little bit worried about how they were beaten to some of those breaks. They'd be a little bit worried about some of the fluidity in the forward play, but reasonably happy with the intensity of the tackling, and probably a little bit of a concern, sorry, as well, obviously, about how they allowed Stephen Sherlock who is a fine kicker, it should be said, give him the space to take those opportunities in the first half. So I think they'd be quite happy coming out of it to say, job is done, we're in the Munster final, we're not maybe not as much talk about us now as there was before the game or coming into the Munster Championship. We'll let people talk about everyone else, and they'll be timing it for when they want it. So
it was kind of extraordinary.
Yeah, still questions, I suppose.
Sorry for cutting across you, Gary. I think it was kind of extraordinary afterwards. It was as if there were Cork people who were relieved that they only lost by 12 points and that they'd made a match of it for 50 minutes.
Yeah, and that, I suppose that says where the Cork public are with regard to that team. But funny, I had seen Cork on the last day against Offaly, and there was so much. Even though they could have lost that game, there's still an awful lot to like about what Cork have. I mean, most teams struggle to get one or two really good kickers in the forwards. You know, when you're coming up in those divisions, you might have one or two top forwards that are going to get you 4 or 5 points a game. But Cork, to me, had 3 or 4 of those scoring threats between Hurley, Sherlock, obviously. Who am I forgetting in the other corner? Cathal Mahoney.
Yeah.
You know, they had 3-4 scorers. And then you had Colm O'Callaghan, Ian Maguire tearing through from midfield, John O'Rourke, a lot of really, really good ball players. And then you had Sean Powter to come back in. So, like, I suppose Cork, the current Cork team are victims of being judged against all of the previous Cork teams. And compared to some of those, they don't seem to have the same maybe level of quality or level of grit, even, I would say. But they're not necessarily a really poor team either, you know. They have a lot of very good footballers, and maybe it's just a little bit of that grit or a little bit of that kind of Graham Canty aura that they need that would just bring them to the next level.
Noel O'Leary.
Perhaps, yeah.
Oisín, when will Cork next beat Kerry in Championship football?
Well, I tell you, first of all, I'll tell you, Paul, the things I liked about Cork. I like more about their structure. I like more about how they went about attacking the kickouts on both sides, and I know that dismantled after a while, but this looks to me something slightly new. The +1 permanent sweep, or whatever way you want to put it. It's in its infancy as far as they look as if they decided on this. They tinkered with 6-7 different things during the league and not deciding on any of them. whereas they look as if now this is what they're going to walk towards. So I like that. I like that about what they're doing. I like the same things as Gary as far as the threats that they have up front. And again, it's not one threat, it's not two threat, it's 3 or 4. And I think when you've got those types of players that can kick scores from distance, I think it gives you the opportunity to get in behind teams sometimes, because the expectancy is, to play a higher line. So there's lots of things I like about them. I suppose if you're going to prepare to play against one of the best teams in the country, you probably need a tried and tested and trusted system, and they don't have that as yet. But if they keep walking towards that and keep tweaking and tinkering it as they go, definitely there's a semblance of something really good there. And to be honest, it's a long time since I said that. As far as beating Kerry, that's a long way off, and they shouldn't. Everything to do with Cork football should not be measured on whether they can beat Kerry or not. I think there's bigger things need to happen in order for that to materialise down the line. They play Kerry, I think, again on Thursday night in the minor championship. So beating Kerry at those levels and continuing to do that, which they have done at different stages down through the years, is important to them and important to the next generation. Because I'm hoping, and I don't know this, but I'm hoping that there is now more joined up thinking as far as what's happening with the 20s, what's happening with the minors, and a pathway through to that senior squad. And if there's not, then they mightn't be Kerry for 20 years. But if there is that pathway there, then there's a semblance of something decent, and they seem to have settled on the way they want to play. I mean, just because you didn't beat Kerry with it doesn't mean you dismantle it and try something else. They've tried enough things. This looks like something which gives them that bit of solidity. And I know that sounds ridiculous, having conceded 23 points, but they kept them in the game for a long time. So for me, I know that's, again, just to add to your point, I know that sounds ridiculous, having lost by 12 points.
It was interesting, Gary. We were down in Donegal last weekend, and
we weren't invited, Gary.
Some of us. Some of us are banned from the Greater Kerry region for crimes against football. We were down there last weekend, and Ronan McCarthy said that the progression, one of the things he said a lot of very interesting things, but one of the things he said was that for Cork football to progress, they needed to burn the boats in terms of the hurlers. And that is that it was fine for lads to play dual going up through the ranks, but once they got through minor, certainly by under 20, if they decided to go with the hurlers, then good luck. But there was to be none of this wavering between the two, coming in for a while, going out for a while, and that people have to do it. And I note that you mentioned that relationship with the hurlers in Clare earlier. Is that the way Cork football needs to go?
I think Cork is a big enough county that they could afford to do that. But I'm always reluctant to say there should be a hard and fast rule about this, because every individual is different. Now, I'm not suggesting that I think a player can do senior intercounty dual at this stage. That I think that day is gone. But
it's over, isn't it? It's over. For example,
yeah, it's gone. It's gone. But I mean, I can take the example, we'll say, of Podge Collins, who was with the hurlers and then came back to the football. I have no issue with Podge coming back into the football. If he's good enough, he'll get on the team. And that should be maybe the judge. Perhaps if and Podge didn't always get in our team because he maybe needed a bit more time with the football, but after a little bit more time with it, he might get into the team. And maybe that's what Cork should be focusing on. That are they have they enough footballers without relying on the potential dual players? And that's probably a better read of it rather than saying necessarily no hurlers or something like that, because you might pick up someone that maybe thinks they're going to be involved in the hurling for a couple of years, doesn't work out for them, and in 3 years they could be an excellent halfback, cornerback, something for you. So that's, I suppose, my experience of it. But I think when you talk about when Cork will beat them again, it's very noticeable for us here. I'm teaching St. Flannan's, and we play in the rivalry, which is the Munster A colleges, and it's constantly now. It's Tralee CBS, it's St. Brendan's, it's Public Skull Cork, and even our Froome Cup team under 16.5 team made a final this year, and Tralee didn't make it, Brendan's didn't make it, Public Skull Cork didn't make it, but Mercy Mount Talk from Tralee made it and gave our boys a bit of a clipping. So they seem to have, a whole host of schools, clubs, teams all contributing to this pool. And even recently I saw again that Jason McGahan is down there, and they have now 15 or 20 coaches trained up in the latest UK SCA, Strength and Conditioning Association, all accredited. I don't know how many there is in Ireland, but I'd say there's 80% of them now potentially in Kerry at the moment, so they're doing an awful lot of things right, a huge amount of things right. And for all those, the rest of us in the province who are trying to compete with them, our focus should be more so on doing what we need to do to get the best out of ourselves rather than necessarily what they are doing, but there's a lot to do that we need to do, I suppose, to match up to them. So I suppose coming back to what I was saying, I'm not seeing that same level of dominance from the Cork schools that we would one time have seen in the rivalry and the different schools competitions. But that's not to say, I suppose, that it won't change in the next couple of years. But at the moment, the supply lines look healthier in Kerry, I would say.
I was looking at the matches at the weekend and the choice of man of the match in various games. Oisín, how is man of the match selected?
I always just look at which corner forward has done the best. Well, I suppose it really is the naked eye, and then maybe backed up with a few bits and pieces as far as I be concerned. The way I look at man of the match is, when the game was there to be won, I suppose, who's your top performer. When the game's in the mat, but I mean, the guy who finishes with 10 points but kicks 6 of them when his team's 9 points up it's not man of the match for me. It's who has that biggest influence when the game is, I'll say, tight or in the melting pot. And then I suppose you're looking for affirmation then, because there's 3 of us picking with the BBC yesterday, and
so it's the co-commentators, yourself, Mickey Hart, and Peter Canavan. Sorry, the analyst.
Yeah, the analysts. We what normally happens is we pick our own man of the match individually, and then that goes up to Marty, and Marty then
That's Marty Clark, who's co-commentator.
Yeah, sorry, who has the choice then of those 3. So yesterday, for example, I said Jamie Brennan, Canavan said Jamie Brennan, and Mickey Hart said Jamie Brennan. So when I went up to Marty, he wasn't spoiled for choice, you know what I mean. So he went with Jamie Brennan. I didn't even ask him after it if he concurred, because I know that I think Owen Bon Gallagher got it as well, but maybe an RTE. If I'm right in saying
I think Ryan McHugh was mentioned as well.
Right. Well, I just thought Jamie Brennan, do you know what I mean? I thought he was exceptional yesterday. I thought his movement, his 4 points from play. But that's how we pick it. That's essentially how we pick it. There's days where it could be 3 different names going up to Marty, and then Marty will have a look from there. Because I suppose.
Do you think it matters?
It doesn't matter to who.
To the player.
it does. I think it matters. Yeah, no, I think it does in time for something to maybe look back on. But like I personally speaking, I've had man of the match awards when I thought it was absolutely horrendous. And I think in times like that, what are you nodding your head for, Guy?
Same as.
But like I sometimes think that somebody looks down and go, McConville got 10 points or he got 9 points, and I have to give him man of the match. And I'm thinking, well, 6 of them were 14-yard free straight in front of the goals. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, but man of the match in the 2002 All-Ireland final, Armagh's only All-Ireland final, that you can't tell me that doesn't matter to you.
Oh, it does, yeah. No, it definitely mattered considering the circumstance, considering, you know, it was our only ever All-Ireland win. That did matter to me and does matter to me, but like that's All-Ireland finals. It's slightly different. I think when you're playing, you know, regular championship games and you're looking to progress, I don't think maybe it matters as much. But it's a nice affirmation for the work that you're doing, you know, on a personal level. And
did All Stars matter to you?
Probably did, yeah. Probably did. Again, I don't know how I didn't get one in '99, and I don't know how I did get one in 2000. So it's just. It's strange, and I suppose that dilutes it, waters it down a bit. Maybe doesn't make it feel as significant because you're wondering, you know, how those decisions are come about. That I get one in 2000 because I didn't get one in '99 or whatever. But look at, I would say that, you know, it's a strange one, the All Stars, because as I say, I felt as if, personally speaking, I had better years, and in 2000 I got one when I didn't feel as if I deserved one. You know, so it's a strange way. It's a strange, and the same thing with the Man of the Match awards. But then you get a little bit older, and you just accept everything that's coming at you. Like, you know what I mean? If you get it and you don't really deserve it, you just take it anyway and just go, yeah, I'll take that. But I think they matter to players, and I think they matter to players who maybe aren't always the first name to roll off the lips of people, because the tendency is that if it's a toss up between the gay, you know, like the Michael Murphys or Ray McHughes and another, the tendency is to go with the same formula as normal and say, you know, Michael Murphy or Ray McHugh, whereas, you know, somebody else has had a particularly big influence on the game. Like yesterday, for example, when I would say McCole, who has been a big player, Owen Bon Gallagher, McManaman, who else? Langan, Patrick McBrady, Michael Murphy. When none of them were really in the game, McGee, it was the likes of Jamie Brennan that really stood up, and Pat Mogan probably as well, who's another guy who's probably unlucky enough not to get it. But those are the guys who stood up when it was really, really tough for Donegal.
Did you ever feel any resentment from other players, or did anyone ever make a comment to you about when you got something and maybe even you felt yourself you didn't deserve it?
Yeah, all the time. My brother, he would have. You may have had that problem yourself, Paul, but brother Jim, who probably felt he would have deserved maybe the first year we won the All Ireland lacrosse. He might have felt he deserved the man of the match on a couple of occasions, and I kept getting it. So yeah, and a couple of players would have mentioned and stuff, but it's all very light-hearted. But you do get the sense that they are actually deep down disappointed and fed up and pissed off and all the rest. But you get a name for these things and you keep getting them.
Yeah. Gary, I was looking back through comments that people made when you retired, and I was looking back at teams that were basically picked and nominations that you got, and you got a whole host of Man of the Match awards yourself. And Seamus Clancy, for example, says you're the greatest Clare player of all time. You're mentioned whenever teams have picked of the great one as being in the running for a team where the greatest players never to win an All Ireland, and so on. To what extent do you take something from that?
I suppose a certain extent. It's nice. Like when you're retired and finished, I suppose it's nice to an extent. The likes of Seamus Clancy, considering he's our only All-Star, and someone I'd come across on and off the pitch, someone like him saying something like that is meaningful. You know, you take a lot from that. But, I don't know, teams that never won All Ireland, like, or you know, I'm not sure how much they like. You could throw lots of very, very good teams together there from any sort of background, even players within counties who have won lots of All Irelands that maybe mightn't have been there at the time when they did win All Ireland, and wouldn't get mentioned in that kind of breath. But there was just a few things there in the man the match you were discussing that. Like I've done it a couple of times myself for TG Cahir, and it's my least favourite part of the job is trying to pick a man the match, because it's usually the co-commentator on TG Cahir that picks it as well. You might get a word in your ear, but the thing I've often found about it, and I think it's evident in who ends up getting the man the match, is there's a personal perspective or a lens. Like I see the match through the lens I always saw the game, so I'm naturally biased towards looking at the midfielders and what are they doing. Most of the pundits talking about Gaelic football are forwards. Here. Can't think of too many defenders. So the natural tendency is to look at what the forwards are doing and see that before you see maybe the work of the defender. And that's not to say that wrong choices are made, but it's so difficult now at times to pick out one player in what is a team game like that. You know, there was times when I got man the match, and okay, I might have won a few kickouts and kicked 2 or 3 points, but like I'm not winning those kickouts if the kickout isn't perfect from the goalkeeper, or I'm not creating those scores if someone isn't getting the ball into position where I come off the shoulder to, you know, and that's obviously that's going to have to happen in man the match. You're going to have to pick someone, but there's so many, I suppose, moving parts that contribute to one person having that really effective performance that that probably doesn't get the recognition maybe that it, I suppose, deserves. But I suppose that's the job of the likes of us to try and, that are talking about games, to pick up on that and highlight it.
Gary, you got a couple of man of the match awards when your team didn't win. Does that change the perspective?
Because I don't remember any of them, Oisín, but
I remember one. I think
I do too. It was a Munster. It was a match against Kerry. It was a Munster final or semi-final. I can't remember which. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. Look, it's nice recognition for the personal effort. You'd say, yeah, okay, I gave what I could give there today, and someone saw that. But if you could swap it, obviously, for the win, or swap it for a Munster championship or whatever, I definitely I'd take that trade all day. Like, and there was, it's funny, there was times, probably more later in my career, where I was like, I hope I don't get man the match. You know, I just don't want it, because it might put a bit more heat on someone else. That, you know, the next day when you're going out, if you're after winning the game and you got man the match, you could be sure that every single thing you had done was going to be analysed to a T, whereas maybe someone else might take some of the heat if they end up getting the man the match, you know.
You're just talking about Seamus Clancy as well. My first season with Armagh, we were in Division 3, and I was absolutely flying it. I think we played, Clare was maybe a 5th or 6th game in the league, and I was tearing it up. It was my first season in. I was about 10.5 stone, probably wet through at that stage. But I come up against Seamus Clancy, who I'd never heard of before. And I was taken off after about possibly 40 minutes. And you know what? I was absolutely delighted to get off as well. He was tough. He was so tough. I hadn't a clue what was coming down the road, what was coming down the track to me that day. But super player.
I was tough unit. We actually played them, would you believe, in an intermediate final in 2006, and Seamus was still playing. and he was in the middle of the field, and himself and his brother were still Cullum. They were still doing damage to them, running the show. And Seamus, we'd some battle that day. I was young, lively, trying to run around the place. Seamus was at the latter end of his career and trying to make sure I didn't. I'll never forget him at the end of the game saying, and I was disgusted with him, like he was after, in my mind, doing everything he could to stop me playing football. But you never stop trying. Fair play to you. They beat us, like, you know. You kept going.
That idea of Seamus Clancy playing with his brother midfield, and Killian, you played with Killian and Shane for your brothers for Clare. How different does it make it when you play on a team with your brothers?
You're way harder than them. I know it's a great thing for the family. Like, it's a great thing for the family. But I definitely would have been. I've been guilty. I'd be way too hard on Shane, especially. Shane is a bit closer in age to me. Killian, I suppose we only overlapped for a couple of years, but I would definitely have been a bit hard on Shane. I suppose I'd expect, because I'd always know what he's capable of, you know. But it's a very special occasion. There was only one day, I think, where the three of us were going off together. And Killian wasn't even involved in the squad that day. He was kind of in training with us. But and then Shane was desperately unfortunate with injuries, broke a collarbone, had a Lisfranc fracture in his foot that kept him out. So had he got a better run with it, I think there's a good chance the three of us would have been on the field together. But it's very special for the family, and it's, I suppose, I know exactly what I'm going to get then when I'm playing with the lads. I know exactly what I'm going to get from them, you know. And that other player that you're maybe still developing a relationship with, you're not 100% certain what he's going to do when he gets the ball. When you're playing with your brothers, that's, you know, straight away you don't have to think, you know, I know if Shane gets the ball in a particular position, if I move to X, I'll get it. Or, you know, if when I get it and get my head up, I'll know where he's going to be, that sort of thing. You know? So football now is even more so becoming about connections and relationships and being able to understand one another. And obviously with your brother, that's a lot easier done than someone else.
And Oisín, you with your brother Jim, who is an iconic figure in Armagh football, an iconic figure in Cross Midland football, or how did that work? Actually,
the first year we won the All-Ireland, Paul Herty had actually broken his leg at work, and actually my brother Jarlath ended up in goals for the whole of the Ulster Championship and right through the All-Ireland final. So he was in goals the first year we won the club, and Jim was corner forward. But I played with Jim. We had a couple of years of an overlap at what do you call it, at Armagh as well. But I remember being in Cork one day and we needed a point to I think to stay up, and Jim got fouled, and at the time, when I say he got fouled, he got properly fouled. Like he we had to wait for the ambulance to come on and get him off the pitch, and it was like a free from about 45 yards. Time was more or less up, and he was in a bad way, and they were taking him off, and he got them to stop, shout back at me to tell me make sure I kicked that over the bar. He was after getting killed for it. The dynamic with myself and Jim was that, like, he was my older brother. You know, he would have dictated a lot of what we did in the forward line, and we sort of followed his lead for the majority of the time. And I remember one day I was the penalty taker. And I might have missed one along the way during the season. And we used to have a team meeting. We used to be in the hotel, so we'd have a team meeting with the management, and then the players would have 5 minutes together. And during the players' meeting, he said, at the end of what he had to say, because he was captain, he said, listen, Oisín, I'll be taking the penalty today just to take a bit of the pressure off you in front of everybody. So it's nothing I get to say. And we actually ended up getting a penalty. And he took the penalty and put it in, and he was the penalty taker then until I think he might have missed one, and then I got them back. But so that was the sort of dynamic there. But the dynamic is it's strange because I don't know how you guys felt, because I know, Paul, you play with a brother or two as well, but the dynamic that was in the house wasn't necessarily the one that transferred onto the pitch, as far as who was doing what and who was the leader, as far as and who was doing what. But it's just a nice feeling whenever you get success. Because for me, I was much younger than both of my brothers, so like I was mascot the first time that they won a county championship, and I just wanted to. But I never actually thought I'd ever get playing with them. But we did, and we had that overlap for a number of years, and it was very special. And then obviously playing with Armagh at the time, even though we weren't winning anything, or being successful, it was still a great time to be involved with.
Is there? I know you mentioned a bit with being hard on Killian and all of that, and there is definitely, it is a totally different thing to play with your brother. There's no, in my view, anyway. But is it also a thing that if there's a bit of aggro in a match, it makes things a little bit different too? I was reading match reports from the 1930s, or there was interviews about match reports in the 1930s where Mick Mackey, the Limerick hurler, whose brother John played wing forward beside him, and John Mackey was asked about what it was like to play with Mick, and he says, with us it was hit one, hit two. In other words, if a row started, everybody was in. Was that your experience of it too?
I don't know if you realise now, Paul, but I'm actually married to a grandniece of Mick Mackey.
Is that right? Is that right?
So I don't know if that's a targeted question. No.
No, well, it actually was.
I've seen those three. When I see those three sisters playing together, that's definitely followed down the lineage. But no, I suppose I'm the eldest, so it's slightly different for me from what Oisín was saying there. I would feel a certain sense of protective nature, like, you know, but I'd be the last fella to get involved in a row in the field. To be honest, I probably need a bit more of it in me. But if there's a row happening, I'd go in and clear it out maybe. But yeah, that is probably the thing that will get the blood boiling more than most.
You'd be sent off now. You'd be contributing to Melee, so you'd be sent off.
Yeah.
If that ever happens, Barry, they've good lawyers in Armagh. They can sort it all out for you. No problem.
Ouch.
Yeah. Oisín, what about you? Did it add? And like, was Jim protective of you when you came? Actually, I read something that you said when you gave a tour of Croke Park in 2009, and you talked about after the drawn match in 2000, you'd had a hard time in the drawn match from Seamus Moynihan, which in fairness, there's no shame in that. But you went to Jim, you were talking to Jim about it afterwards, and he was talking to you about not bringing it into contact with him, which is in fairness, not bad advice, and about moving him side to side and stuff like that. Did you find that useful? And was he protective of you?
Well, I'll tell you exactly what he said. He said, stay the fuck away from him. So that basically was, don't take it into contact with him. Don't keep him on the move and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, and he was very good. His movement was unbelievable.
Yeah, he was a brilliant footballer.
Yeah, I would have looked a lot at his movement as far as, you know, how to lose defenders and not having to make the hard run, the big, long, hard run all the time. So, I would have learned a lot from him in that way. And the thing about being protective, probably overprotective to begin with, and then there was a discussion had at one stage where we go. What we did was we sort of flipped that and made sure that we.
Oisín, just hang on there 1 second. Just take that from, there was a discussion we had at one stage.
Yeah, look, there was a discussion we had at one stage where, you know, we were probably being targeted and people were preying on the fact that, you know, we were standing up for each other or every time we was fouled, and then we talked about, you know, how being targeted or fouled or you know, hit off the ball or whatever was a compliment, and we sort of took that and we run with it, and we use that, and I still use that with young ones now or teams that are coached. Like, somebody's at you, it's a compliment. You know, that they're scared of what you can do, so Used to do that. But look, at the dynamic for me was great because Jim used to win the majority of the frees, and I used to have the job of kicking them over the bar, and that was a dynamic that I really liked, to be honest.
Yes, and we'll leave it there for this week. Thanks very much. I know you've a busy morning off. Or is it tomorrow morning the facial is?
You promised you wouldn't say that's the last.
Hey, mama on the TV wrong. Come and love you, daddy, all night long. All
And you? What do you do?
It's a bit complicated to explain.
Hey, hey.
You know, I still didn't get exactly what your job is.
That is what I do.
New Renault Arcana E-Tech Hybrid from €299 per month on the road. Winner, Irish Medium Crossover SUV in the 2022 Car of the Year Awards.
A grain of rice, a grain of rice is going to tip the scale. Just remember that, lad.
There's a small bit of a needle there.
Come on, Mayo, you've got to get Andy Moran into the game.
Listen, victories and